G'day guys. I just got sent a question from one of my students about composite functions. He said, well, what happens when there's an absolute value in there? What changes? I mean, do they work the same way? Well, yes, but we just got to be a little bit more careful. So he gave these two particular functions, and then we've composed those functions. So we'll give an f of x with -5 minus the absolute value of x, and g of x is the square root of x. So I'm looking at f of g of x and g of f of x. Okay. So f of g of x means that in f of x, everywhere I see an x, I replace it with g of x. So g of x is the square root of x. So in f of x, I want to replace that with the square root of x. So that's what that looks like. -5 minus the absolute value of the square root of x. And in g of f of x, well, that means in g of x, everywhere I see an x, I'm going to replace it with f of x. So I'm going to replace that x with -5 minus the absolute value of x. Okay, so the square root of -5 minus the absolute value of x. Right. So our question is now, well, what are the domains and ranges of these guys here? What's the domain and range of f of g of x? Well, we just follow the normal rules we do for domain and range. What am I not allowed to do when it comes to square roots? Well, I'm not allowed to square root a negative. So for f of g of x, my domain, I can't square root a negative, so my domain is all real x, such that x must be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, well, what does that make of my range then? What happens to my range? Well, I mean, we can sit there and try to draw the graph, or we can just sort of apply a bit of nous to it. -5 minus a positive number, because the absolute value is going to give us a positive result. -5 take away a number that's bigger than or equal to 0. Well, if you've got -5, then you're taking away a number that's bigger than or equal to 0, well, you're going to get results that are less than or equal to -5. Okay, so our range is all real y, such that y is less than or equal to -5. Okay, what about for g of f of x? This one's a little bit different. G of f of x was this guy over here. Now, I can get the absolute value of whatever I like, but I can't square root a negative. I can't square root a negative. Well, have a look at this. -5 minus some positive, because the absolute value of whatever value I put in for x is going to be bigger than or equal to 0. So it's -5 minus something that's bigger than or equal to 0. Well, that's always going to be -5 or below, and I can't square root that. So there's no domain. There's no x values allowed at all. Right? There's nothing at all. If there's no domain, then there's no range. If there's no x values that I can map onto y values, then there's no y values either. So this is actually the empty function. So remember, what's a function? A function is it does something. You pluck up the courage, you go up to a young girl and say, hey, you want to come to a function with me? And she says, what's going to happen? And you say, absolutely nothing. Well, who's going to go? Absolutely nobody. Well, it sounds kind of lame, doesn't it? There's no function at all. There's nothing happening to anything at all. And that's what this is. It's the empty function. Nothing happens to nothing. I hope that helps. Let me know. I mean, they're the example functions that you gave me. We've looked at f of g of x, g of f of x. We've looked at domain and range. I'll leave you to have a play with graphing. If you get desperately, obviously this can't be graphed at all because it's the empty function. but I'll let you have a chance of playing with a graph of that guy over there. It's a good exercise. If you get into any sort of trouble, jump on Desmos and give it a go there, and then see if it matches up with what you thought it might be. Let me know how you're getting on. I love the fact you're asking questions, guys. Fantastic.